According to the Guinness World Records, the Bible holds the title for the best-selling book ever, with an estimated 5 to 7 billion copies published to date. You don't need to be religious to recognize its most famous stories, which have become ingrained in global culture. For instance, references to Noah's Ark or David and Goliath are widely understood. However, there has long been a debate about the historical accuracy of the Bible, given that it was written over many centuries by various authors, often long after the events occurred. Recently, this debate has taken an intriguing turn, as scientific studies have begun to provide evidence supporting the occurrence of many of the Bible's renowned events. This video delves into 9 prominent biblical events that science has started to validate. Let's begin our exploration. The Great Flood. One of the most famous biblical stories is that of the Great Flood, recounted in Genesis chapters 6 to 9. According to the Bible, God, seeing the rampant wickedness and corruption on earth 10 generations after creation, decides to cleanse the world with a flood. He declares, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." Genesis 6:7. Among humanity, only Noah is found righteous, and God instructs him to build an ark to survive the coming deluge. Noah is told to take his family and pairs of every animal species aboard. As Noah finishes the ark, the flood begins on that day. All the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and rain fell on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Genesis 7:11-12. The flood devastates the earth, annihilating all life except those on the ark. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, people and animals, and the creatures that move along the ground, and the birds were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. Genesis 7:23. Eventually, the waters recede, and Noah, his family, and the animals repopulate the earth. For a long time, scholars dismissed the story as mere myth, but perceptions began to shift in 2000. Geologists Walter Pittman and William Ryan from Columbia University studied core samples from beneath the Black Sea and discovered evidence of a historical flood. They found a layer of river delta mud and freshwater mollusk shells beneath the sea floor, indicating the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake surrounded by fertile land. The duo proposed that a dramatic flood occurred when melting ice caps raised global sea levels, causing the Mediterranean Sea to break through the Bosporus Strait and flood the Black Sea basin with tremendous force. This theory drew the attention of marine scientist Robert Ballard, who in his explorations found the remains of ancient buildings, stone tools, and ceramics underwater, suggesting human habitation before the flood. Carbon dating of mollusk shells showed a sudden transition from freshwater to saltwater species, supporting the theory of a cataclysmic flood. Despite this, skeptics argue that while there is evidence of a significant regional flood, it does not necessarily support the notion of a global flood. As described in Genesis 7:19, the waters rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. However, flood myths are pervasive across many cultures worldwide, suggesting a common historical event or shared ancestral memory. Evidence of other ancient floods, like those in China's Yellow River Valley, the Central Andean Plateau, and India's Saraswati River, continues to emerge, leading some to speculate that these stories might have a basis in real historical events. This raises intriguing questions about the origins of these widespread flood narratives and the possibility of a shared source for these tales across different cultures. Biblical plagues and modern evidence. In the book of Exodus, chapters 7 to 11, the Bible recounts the story of 10 plagues sent by God to compel Pharaoh Ramses I to release the Israelites from slavery. Each successive plague inflicted horrors that swayed Pharaoh's resolve, only for him to renege once the calamity subsided. This pattern continued until the 10th and final plague, which finally persuaded Pharaoh to free the Israelites. For many years, secular scholars dismissed this narrative as a mere legend, crafted to demonstrate the supremacy of the Israelite God over other deities. However, recent geological and climatic evidence suggests these events could have indeed transpired. In 2010, researchers studying stalagmites in Egyptian caves discovered dramatic climate shifts around 3,000 years ago, corresponding to the era of Pharaoh Ramses II. The data indicated a sudden increase in temperatures and severe drought, which likely diminished the Nile River into a sluggish, muddy stream. This environmental upheaval could have set the stage for the plagues described in the Bible. For instance, the Bible's first plague, which turned the Nile's waters into blood, Exodus 7:20-21, can be scientifically interpreted as a bloom of toxic freshwater algae, Oscillatoria rubescens, known as burgundy blood algae. This algae gives water a blood-red appearance and renders it toxic, killing aquatic life and causing a foul odor. The subsequent plagues follow logically from this initial ecological disaster. The proliferation of frogs on land, Exodus 8:2-4, resulted from their need to escape the contaminated water, while the death of these frogs would have led to an explosion of insect populations, including lice and flies, Exodus 8:16-17, 8:24. The fifth plague, Exodus 9:3, which struck livestock, could be explained by diseases like African horse sickness or blue tongue spread by these insects. Human boils, Exodus 9:9-10, might have been a consequence of insect bites or consumption of tainted meat. The seventh plague of hail, Exodus 9:22-26, could correlate with severe climate events or even the massive volcanic eruption on Santorini, which deposited volcanic ash as far as Egypt. This eruption also potentially caused the locust swarms, Exodus 10:13-15, and the 3 days of darkness, Exodus 10:21-23. Finally, the 10th plague, Exodus 11:5, killing the firstborn, might have been due to the consumption of mycotoxin-contaminated grain, which firstborns would have been more likely to consume first. Collectively, these phenomena suggest that the biblical plagues were not mere allegories but were rooted in actual historical and environmental events, later shaped into a narrative showcasing divine power. Parting of the Red Sea. The parting of the Red Sea is one of the most iconic stories in the Bible, detailed in Exodus 14. After the 10th plague convinces Pharaoh to release the Israelites from bondage, he quickly changes his mind and sends his army, including 600 of his best chariots, to recapture them. The Israelites find themselves trapped at Pi-Hahiroth, surrounded by mountains and the Red Sea. In this critical moment, God instructs Moses to lift his rod and stretch his hand over the sea to divide it, allowing the Israelites to walk on dry ground with walls of water on either side. As Pharaoh's army pursues, Moses again stretches his hand over the sea, causing the waters to return and drown the entire Egyptian army, leaving no survivors. This miraculous event, once deemed impossible, gained a new perspective in 2010, when Carl Drews from the National Center for Atmospheric Research proposed that a natural phenomenon known as wind set-down could have parted the waters, explaining the biblical account through fluid dynamics. Carl Drews used computer simulations and ancient geography to support his theory that strong east winds could have driven water to one side, creating a temporary land bridge. His research dismissed the Red Sea as the crossing point due to its size and depth, and instead focused on Lake Tanis, where steady 63 mph winds could have pushed waters aside, exposing dry land. Drews highlighted that the biblical term Sea of Reeds had been mistranslated to Red Sea in Greek texts, suggesting that Lake Tanis, a shallow, reed-filled lagoon in 1250 BCE, matched the description. This natural explanation suggests that the Israelites could have crossed during a wind set-down event, aligning with the biblical narrative of crossing the Sea of Reeds, and reinforcing the plausibility of this dramatic escape. Drews' findings bridge the gap between the biblical account and natural science, showing that the extraordinary event might have been facilitated by natural forces, making the story even more compelling. the sun stands still. The story of the sun standing still appears in Joshua chapter 10, where Joshua, leading the Israelite army against the combined forces of 5 Amorite kings, calls upon God for a miracle. He asks for the sun and moon to stand still to give his troops more time to defeat their enemies. The Bible records, "So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies," Joshua 10:13. This event has traditionally been interpreted as a demonstration of God's power, but in 2017, physicists Colin Humphreys and Graham Washington suggested that it could describe an actual astronomical phenomenon. They proposed that this biblical account might reflect a historical event, possibly an eclipse. Humphreys and Washington built on a hypothesis first put forward by linguist Robert Wilson a century earlier. Previous researchers had unsuccessfully searched for evidence of a total eclipse from the period around Joshua's time, approximately 1200 BCE. Humphreys and Washington, however, considered the possibility of an annular eclipse, where the moon passes in front of the sun but does not cover it completely. Using computer simulations, and discovered that an annular eclipse occurred on October 30th, 1207 BCE. This finding was significant because it aligned with the biblical narrative and suggested that the day the sun stopped could correspond to a real historical event, offering new insights into both scientific and historical studies. Sodom and Gomorrah. In the Bible, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by divine intervention due to their extreme wickedness and sin, as recounted in Genesis 19. God sent 2 angels to execute this judgment, saving only Lot, a righteous man, and his family. As they fled, God unleashed burning sulfur from the heavens, obliterating the cities and everything within them. This catastrophic event also transformed Lot's wife into a pillar of salt when she disobeyed God's command and looked back at the destruction. Historically, this account has been viewed as a religious narrative illustrating God's wrath against sin, similar to the story of the Great Flood. However, in 2006, the discovery of significant archaeological evidence at Tal el-Hammam began to shift this perception. Tal el-Hammam, a major Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley, was unearthed by archaeologist Stephen Collins and his team. They found a 5-foot deep layer of soot filled with burned human bones, melted mud brick, and pottery with a green glaze, all indicative of an intense, short-lived heat event around 1650 BCE. Further investigation revealed a high-pressure phenomenon akin to a cosmic airburst, much like the Tunguska event in 1908. This explosion, with no visible crater, suggested an asteroid or comet detonation in the atmosphere, causing extreme temperatures and pressures that destroyed the city. Researchers also discovered unusually high salt concentrations, likely from the impact hitting the Dead Sea, which made the land infertile for centuries. This evidence aligns remarkably with the biblical description of Sodom and Gomorrah's fiery end and subsequent desolation, leading scientists to propose that the story could have a basis in this historical cosmic event. Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel, as recounted in the book of Genesis, tells a story from a few generations after Noah's great flood, during a time when humanity spoke a single language. People embarked on an ambitious project to build a city with a tower that reached the heavens, using brick and tar as their materials. Genesis 11:3-4. Their aim was to create a monument that would make a name for themselves. However, this act of hubris displeased God, who responded by confusing their language, making communication impossible and scattering them across the earth, thus halting the construction. Genesis 11:7-8. This biblical tale is traditionally used to explain the origin of different languages. While modern science dismisses this account as the origin of linguistic diversity, scholars have debated its historical basis, with some linking it to the ziggurats of ancient Babylon. In 2017, a breakthrough came when Andrew George, a Babylonian professor at the University of London, examined a baked clay tablet from Babylon, which had been hidden in a private collection for a century. The tablet depicted a large ziggurat with 7 levels and included an inscription from King Nebuchadnezzar describing the construction of a structure called Itamananki Ziggurat Babel, or the Temple Tower of Babylon. The inscription closely mirrored the biblical description, stating that the tower was built with bitumen and baked brick and reached towards the heavens, Genesis 11:3-4. Nebuchadnezzar's account also mentioned mobilizing workers from across the empire, reflecting the diverse linguistic background mentioned in the Bible. This discovery suggested to George and others that the biblical story of the Tower of Babel could have been inspired by the real ziggurat of Itamananki, a structure the Israelites likely encountered during their captivity in Babylon, incorporating its grandeur and the diverse workforce into their narrative. David and Goliath. The story of David and Goliath, found in the first book of Samuel, chapter 17, is one of the Bible's most famous narratives. It begins with the Israelite and Philistine armies at a standoff in the Elan Valley. For 40 days, a massive Philistine warrior named Goliath challenges the Israelites to single combat, but no one dares to fight him due to his intimidating size. The Bible describes Goliath's formidable appearance. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. Eventually, David, a young shepherd, accepts the challenge armed only with his sling. In their encounter, David runs towards Goliath, slings a stone that strikes Goliath on the forehead, causing him to fall face down. David then uses Goliath's sword to kill him and cut off his head. This story not only introduces David, who later becomes a pivotal biblical figure, but also stands as a timeless tale of the underdog triumphing against formidable odds. For a long time, scholars viewed the story as purely allegorical, designed to convey themes of ingenuity and faith overcoming brute strength. This perspective began to shift in 1993, when a broken stone slab from the late 9th or early 8th century BCE was found in northern Israel. This slab, inscribed by an Aramean king, mentioned a defeat of the king of Israel from the house of David, providing tangible evidence of David's historical existence. Further supporting the plausibility of the biblical account, single combat was a known practice in ancient warfare, and slings were highly effective weapons. Discoveries in the ancient city of Gath, believed to be Goliath's hometown, have added more intrigue. In 2005, archaeologists found a shard of pottery inscribed with a name similar to Goliath, and previous discoveries of enormous spearheads in the same region suggested the possibility of a giant warrior. Additionally, in 2015, excavations revealed unusually large buildings and fortifications from Gath's time, possibly indicating that the city accommodated oversized inhabitants. These findings have led scholars to reconsider the historical reality of the David and Goliath story, suggesting it might have a basis in actual events. Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve, a cornerstone of biblical narratives, depicts the origin of humanity through the first human couple. In the book of Genesis, God creates Adam, the first man, and places him in the Garden of Eden. Observing that it is not ideal for Adam to be alone, God first creates animals but finds them insufficient as companions. Subsequently, God creates Eve from one of Adam's ribs. Adam and Eve, succumbing to a serpent's temptation, eat from the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This act incurs God's wrath, leading to their expulsion from the Garden of Eden, after which they establish the human race. While modern science refutes the notion of humanity originating from a single pair, suggesting instead a gradual evolution, emerging evidence offers an intriguing perspective that aligns in some ways with the biblical account. This evidence revolves around the concepts of mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down through the maternal line, can be traced back to a single woman known as mitochondrial Eve. Similarly, the Y chromosome passed through the paternal line points to a single male ancestor, Y chromosome Adam. Contrary to their biblical namesakes, these individuals were not the first humans but are the most recent common ancestors in their respective genetic lines. Research in 1987 identified mitochondrial Eve as living approximately 200,000 years ago in Africa, with Y chromosome Adam dating to about 100,000 years ago. Initially, these findings suggested a significant temporal gap between the two. However, in 2013, studies revealed new DNA sequence variations, suggesting that Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve could have lived contemporaneously in the same region. This sparked a re-evaluation of their potential interaction and reproduction. In 2020, biologist Joshua Swamidass proposed that a couple, metaphorically referred to as Adam and Eve, could have been universal ancestors through genealogical connections, not genetic. This notion, supported by a 2004 study, implies that a common ancestry for all humans could date back only a few thousand years. Swamidass's theory bridges evolutionary science with the biblical narrative, proposing that both could coexist, acknowledging an ancestral couple who became the progenitors of all living humans, the creation of the universe. The Bible begins with a profound declaration in the beginning: God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Genesis 1:1-3. This opening passage establishes the foundational religious belief that God is the creator of the universe. Interestingly, recent discussions have highlighted the similarities between this biblical account and the Big Bang Theory, which is widely accepted by contemporary science. The Big Bang Theory posits that the universe originated from a singular, incredibly dense point, which expanded rapidly, spreading matter across space and eventually allowing light to penetrate as atoms formed. This parallel suggests that the Bible's description of creation aligns with scientific understanding of the universe's origins, with some scientists affirming that the Big Bang provides evidence of a definitive starting point, akin to the biblical narrative of creation. Moreover, the Bible frequently describes the universe as being stretched out, Isaiah 42:5, Jeremiah 10:12, a concept that resonates with modern scientific knowledge of the universe's continuous expansion. The verbs used in these descriptions vary, sometimes indicating an ongoing process and other times suggesting a completed action. This duality reflects the Big Bang Theory's portrayal of the universe's creation, a definitive event that initiated the ongoing expansion of the cosmos. This remarkable correlation raises intriguing questions about the ancient writers' insights into the nature of the universe, which align with scientific discoveries made only in the last 50 years. The convergence of these ancient scriptural descriptions with contemporary scientific theories invites further contemplation on the interplay between religious texts and scientific understanding, challenging us to consider the possibility of a deeper connection between the two.
If you found this video enjoyable, please consider liking and sharing it. Additionally, subscribing to this channel will ensure that you receive more updates in the future. Thank you.